Hey guys, Melissa here. I'm back with another pastel painting I'm demonstrating for you today. This is a beach scene done in soft pastels. I used Fisher 400 sanded paper. It's very similar to UR 400 sanded paper, just by a different brand. I have a little stockpile of it laying around, so I decided to use some of that up. For pastels, I mainly use Unisons, I use some Rembrandts, RIcheson, I think a couple Terry Ludwigs as well. I pick my pastels more on the colors and the values than the specific brand, though some of them do work well for certain things. What I'm using right now is the Prismacolor NuPastels. Those are a harder pastel, so they work really well for doing underpaintings and then for using them towards the end for final details because they're nice and hard. Once I get my underpainting down, in this case I used not specifically complementary colors, but colors that were just bright and happy and were colors that I wanted underneath my final painting. I'm using some isopropyl alcohol, as I usually do, to wet the pastel and kind of blend it into the paper. And this does preserve the tooth of the paper. If you were to use soft pastels with this method, it would still work, though you may be, gumming up the tooth of the paper a little bit, filling it in a little more than you would want to at this beginning stage. So that's the reason for the NuPastels. And I just use a synthetic paintbrush to apply that. If you want a little more texture when you're doing that, you can use like an old raggedy brush that has bristles that are splayed. If you want something a little smoother, you can use a newer brush that has bristles that are still intact. And once that underpainting is dry, make sure it dries first. You can lay on your soft pastels. For pastels, it's usually easier to go from darker values to lighter values and from bigger shapes to smaller shapes. So you can see what I start out with is some really dark purples and dark reds for the reeds in the foreground and a kind of dark medium value brown for the sand. For skies, I like to use a bunch of different colors, so you'll see me use various blues, purples, pinks, I think even a couple oranges in there as well. And I did change the color of the sky from my reference photo to the painting itself, and that's just personal preference. The horizon line that I'm working on in the back, what connects the sky to the water, that I do want to be nice and soft, so you did see me blend a bit with my finger there, but overall I don't do a whole lot of blending with my fingers. I just use it to soften things, basically. I'm not trying to blend big areas of colors together. And again, that's just personal preference. There are some paintings where I'll use my whole hand to blend certain areas out. Now, sand that I'm working on is not just brown or tan sand. I'm going to start out with those colors, and you can see me using a little bit of pipe foam insulation to squish that into the tooth of the paper. And I will come on top with a bunch of different lighter colors just to spice things up a little bit. It just adds a little bit of interest to the painting. And I will change my composition a bit in this one. A little more towards the end. I decided that where I was placing the reeds in the foreground grasses was not ideal. It kind of had a funny look to it to me. That's one of the great things about pastels, is that you can change your mind halfway through the painting and use your imagination. So once I have my darkest values in those grasses, in the purples, browns, reds, I think I use some dark greens in there as well, I start using some of my lighter, warmer colors. So those are my brighter greens mostly. But I am adding a few other colors just for interest. I don't want everything to be just green. And for a lot of the times when you see me using, you'll see me using Rembrandt pastels a lot for the grasses because they're more of a medium to hard pastel rather than a soft pastel. So they're good for making finer lines. So this next part gets a little repetitive with the grasses, so I'm going to put on a little bit of music and I'll be back with some commentary in a bit. So you can see I've changed the composition a little bit at this point. I added a little more grasses in the foreground to even out the composition a bit. And now what I'm doing is adding my final touches at this point. So I'm adding those, I'm not sure what they're called, the big fat parts on the end of the reeds there. And for that, I'm using one of my softest pastels. That is a Great American pastel, one of my favorite brands for finishing touches. They're about on par with Terry Ludwig's as far as softness goes, but they're a little creamier. So they do very well for adding texture and for adding finishing touches like that. Also for finishing touches, I'm using NuPastels. Those are the Prismacolors. They're the hard sticks that you see me using. And those just have that nice sharp edge that works really well for grasses and things like that especially. And at this point, I'm just trying to lighten up the sand a little bit, add finishing touches to the grasses, so little bits of brighter colors, different colors. I am using some orange on those grasses as well, since orange is a complement to green, and that just adds a little bit extra pizzazz, extra interest to it. And then adjusting my values, of course, with a couple darks again. So the exact colors that I'm using don't really matter, and I honestly couldn't tell you the exact colors that I'm using. The values matter more when you're trying to create something that looks realistic. So as long as you have the value right, the exact color doesn't have to be, say, what you see in your reference photo. And then I do usually leave my painting off to the side, somewhere I can see it for a day or two before I decide if it's actually done. Coming at it with fresh eyes does help. And that is the finished painting. Please make sure you like and subscribe to this video so you can see more of my work. If you want to get notifications of any time that I upload a video, there's a little bell icon next to the subscribe button. Please hit that and you'll be updated every time that I post a new video. All right, any questions, please feel free to leave them below, and I'll see you next time.